There are periods like in the 70s when inflation comes down for 2 years in a row. The rate of inflation drops from, say, 8% to 4%, and interest rates on the 30-year treasuries drop from, say, 9% to 4%. Can happen. Has happened in the 70s, and yet interest rates went to 18% in 1981. In my view, the dollar is of course doomed as a currency. But the others are also doomed. That is the beauty. The dollar exists and is a strong currency as long as the others are equally bad or worse, which is the case.
Hey guys, welcome back to Capitalcosm. Today I have the great honor of interviewing the publisher of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom Report, Mr. Marc Faber. Thank you so much for coming on, my friend.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. And before we get started, guys, I'd like to remind you to check out the Substack that we just opened. There will be an exclusive portion of this interview on Substack towards the end. So if you haven't already, you get ad-free content, you get an exclusive portion that you won't find on YouTube. And you also get early access to these videos before the YouTube audience, as well as many other perks that you could find in the Substack link down below, capitalcosm.substack.com. All right, Marc, we did allude to the fact that you are the creator of the Gloom, Boom, and Doom Report. But what I do with all of my first-time guests who are, making their maiden voyage onto this show is, I'd like to kind of understand your origin story. What brought you into finance and investing, in this world we inhabit?
Well, I was born in 1946 in Switzerland, and then I went to school there in Geneva and Zurich. And then I completed my studies, and I wrote for my PhD in Zurich and in London at the London School of Economics. Then I had finished my studies, and then I didn't know what I would want to do. But I soon found out that for people who are halfway intelligent, the easiest way to make money is in the financial sector. So I started to work for an investment bank, a broker in New York in 1970. And then I went for 1 year into Switzerland. And then they sent me to Asia, to Hong Kong, to build up their Asian business, which at that time was very small. But then I built it up. And in 1978, White Weld was acquired, the American part, for which I worked, by Merrill Lynch. And neither Merrill Lynch wanted me to work for them, nor I wanted to work for Merrill Lynch. So I opened the offices for Drexel Burnham Lambert in Asia. And then I ran the office until 1990, when they went out of business. And then I started my own business. By that time, I was still in Hong Kong. I moved there in 1973. And then in year 2000, I decided, because we had bought a property in Thailand in 1997 during the Asian crisis, I decided to move to Thailand, but I kept my office in Hong Kong. So I essentially work out of Hong Kong and out of Thailand, but I have an office in Hong Kong. And I did until, I still do fund management, and I'm an advisor to some funds and so forth. And I also write my 2 newsletters, every month one. This is what I do.
Yeah, so let's just dive right in. Let's start off macro. Let's get your views on the economy, geopolitics, everything, and then we can kind of be more specific and hone in on specific topics. So, with that said, what is kind of like your 30,000-foot view of the economy and the world in general right now? What's front and center on your radar screen right now?
Well, if I look at growth rates around the world, they've all obviously slowed down. And if we look at 2018, 2019, pre-COVID, and today, most economic indicators that I follow are lower than in 2019, And the typical family in the world, there are exceptions, but the average family is less well off than they were in 2018, 2019, because the cost of living have gone up more than the salaries. And then we also have to distinguish, do people have cash or do they owe money? For people who have cash, like in my business, you need a lot of cash in the brokerage industry. The conditions are better now because interest rates have gone up. 3 years ago, you got next to zero interest. So that time was very bad for cash holders, deposit holders, whereas now it's relatively good. Other people, they have large borrowings, consumer credits and so forth. They're hurt by the rise in interest rates. So whenever someone asks or talks about the economy, we have to understand the economy is very complex and it consists of millions of households. And you can have some households, they are better off because of money printing. And these are the people that come on CNBC and on Fox News and in the main media. And then they will tell you how great the economy is doing. And all these media outlets, they will not interview ordinary people on the street who are struggling. So the media is distorting the views, and the media is very, say in America, is very pro-government, Biden administration. So they will do everything to see to it that, say, the Biden administration stays in power. They're all afraid of Trump and so forth and so on. So when we talk about the economy, to talk overall is not very helpful. We need to really look at specific sectors. It's like when someone asks me, are you bullish about stocks or bearish? Well, some stocks will go up and others will go down. And maybe everything goes down, but some will go down less than others. So everything is much more complex than the media makes it up to be. Because the media, they know the typical citizen young people nowadays have very short attention time. They like TikTok. That's TikTok. Rapid. And social sciences are very, very complex, including economics.
Yeah.
Anyway, what is the next question?
Yeah, I mean, I think people take that for granted. The social sciences are a lot more complex than the hard sciences. Hard sciences are fairly predictable, measuring.
Yes.
Yeah. Because, when you're dealing with things.
How can you predict the mood of a woman? As simple as that.
Exactly. Now try to predict 4 billion women or 8 billion people in general. So, this is why like these central planners always, kind of fall on their sword because, they think they have like a committee of the smartest 10 people or the smartest 20 people, but they will always underperform a decentralized collection of 8 billion nodes, striving for their own self-interest. You may be the smartest person in the room, but you're not smarter than the room. So, this is why they always try to, they put their fingers on the try to push all the buttons and turn all the levers at the exact same time to produce like an outcome that they want, but they always end up creating these second, third order effects that they never intended.
Well, philosophically speaking, I think nobody would aspire to be considered the smartest person in a room. You wouldn't want to be in that room in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So anyway, this is my view about the global economy. I think the global economy, if we measure standards of living, the standards of living in most countries, there are some exceptions. Maybe in India, the standards of living of people have gone up in the last 5 years, most likely. But in most other Western countries, Western democracies, France, England, Germany, for sure, that is guaranteed. For sure, in these countries, the standards of living of the median family, the typical family, has gone down.
Right. Now, coming up this, I think over the next year or so, next year, you'll have in the United States, the payments to the interest will outstrip the taxes that are collected from the government. So, what does that imply in your opinion?
I'm not sure the interest payments will outstrip the taxes collected. It's probably still less, but it will be a very considerable amount, over $1 trillion for sure. Now, I'm glad you're asking this question, because I think most Americans do not think enough about this issue. So you have a government debt that is growing very rapidly. The government debt grows very rapidly when the government spends more money than it collects in taxation. You can't do that permanently without causing some damage to the value of your currency. That is the first conclusion. In other words, I would be reluctant to think that the dollar will remain strong. It's likely that the dollar will weaken. Number two, there is a problem if the government spends more than it collects. The problem can be solved in 3 different ways. The government could go to the people and say, look, we spend too much, we collect too little, we have to increase taxation. Show me a politician in the world that will be elected if he goes to the people and say, we need to increase taxation. None. Second solution is the government goes to the people and say, well, we spend too much. We have to implement cuts. And we start with police officers, firemen, and war veterans. We cut their benefits by 30%. I'd like to see the revolution that follows this economic policy measure. The third way is, of course, and that's is default. But you understand, the issue is such that the financial system owns bonds that are issued by the government. So you have insurance companies, they own these bonds. You have pension funds, you have individuals, and you have mutual funds. If the government decides to default, I tell you, it's incredibly messy. Also international, because a lot of foreign countries, they own a large portion of the US debt. Every government throughout history in this situation of deficits has embarked on one policy measure, and that is to print money. Every government throughout history. That is the easiest. It is a tax, but people don't realize it, that it's a tax. The government can say, well, we have inflation. It's because of Putin. It's because of China, Xi Jinping. It's because of evil Iranians. And they have a whole catalog of excuses for inflation, with the exception of one issue. And this is that the government is overspending, and that the government, through its agent, the central bank, is printing money. That causes inflation. Neither Putin nor anybody else overseas. It's self-inflicted inflation, but they can't go to the people and say, well, you know, we are a failed government, so we have inflation.
Yeah.
And the tragic part nowadays is that if you look at the two parties, Republican and Democrats, both of them have no intention whatsoever to reduce the deficit. Zero intention.
Do you think that's why, like in the Kamala camp, they're proposing this unrealized tax, unrealized gains tax? Or are they just trying to like get every penny that they can from the public? They say it's only for $100 million net worth individuals, but eventually they'll bring it down to everyone like they did with the income tax. So is this part of that scheme?
I have no idea because I really don't know what Kamala Harris and their team are about to implement, since the team and she are completely ignorant. They know nothing. This is a dangerous situation in history where we have, not only in the US, in most democracies of the West, completely incompetent people. They never worked a day in their lives. They became professional politicians early on, or they went to a university where they were taught by the communists and the socialists all kind of abstruse economic policies, measure, and social theories. But they never worked in their lives, and they then, in their complete incompetence, take policy decisions. That is the worst part, because the market actually functions reasonably well. No market is perfect. In a free market, if you have a free system of thought, of economics, some people will go bankrupt. But you interfere into the free market with government officials that are dumb and incompetent, you distort the free economy, you create slower growth or recessions, and declining standards of living, and diminished freedom. That is a consequence of, say, the current administration.
Yeah, and this isn't anything new. Like this happens throughout history, right? Like history doesn't repeat, but it certainly does rhyme. And so if that's the case, what comes next? You kind of alluded that they're probably going to inflate away their burden, but from a social side, what comes next?
Well, there are certain things that are not predictable. Exactly what will happen, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We have to see who gets elected in November. But in general, I think if Kamala Harris and the Democrats win, it would be a disaster for the US and for the world. This is my view. That's why I wouldn't vote for her. But other people seemingly have different views.
And so how would
the danger is the corporate sector and wealthy people, they support actually these socialists and the crazy people because they think they can control them against the masses of people who don't want to vote for them. But anyway, I don't know what will happen.
Do you see like a major shift from the Biden policy, Biden administration policy, though, if Kamala gets in, or is it just a continuation of Biden?
It will be even worse. Much worse. But I just want to say one thing. I mean, not all is lost. We can have elections. The last ones were probably stolen, but we can have elections, and in some countries they have moved more to the right, thankfully. And maybe in the US, Trump will be elected.
The question is, will it be inaugurated?
Not that I admire Mr. Trump, don't misunderstand me. But we're talking about two really unpleasant candidates for office. And then you choose the least unpleasant, and Trump is less unpleasant than Kamala Harris. My view, I accept. If we are in a democracy, you may have a different view than your viewers as well.
Yeah. Well, while we're on the political side, what is your biggest geopolitical concern right now, considering everything that's going on?
Well, I think I have friends, they think World War III has begun and it may escalate. We don't know. I mean, there could be an accident. If Ukraine attacks Russian territory and say if they destroyed something major in Russia, I think Russia would respond. And I'd be a little bit careful to mess around with a country that has the missile and nuclear arsenal such as Russia. Just, I'd be a little bit careful.
Yeah, and why does it appear like the investment class isn't really paying much attention to all this risk? Like oil's down below $70. The stock market is still ripping. There doesn't seem to be much concern from the investment class.
Well, I mean, I've written about the stock market lately, and I think that we are not just about stocks, but I think we are at major turning point in asset markets. And to explain it all, I have to go back to long-term cycles. We have cycles of accelerating inflation and then cycles of deflation or disinflation. And we have cycles of rising interest rates and falling interest rates, rising commodity prices and falling commodity prices. These cycles last 45 to 60 years. These are long cycles. And again, because of money printing, a lot has been distorted. But in general, the last cycle peak for commodities and inflation was 1980-81. Since then, inflation has been coming down and interest rates came down and bottomed out. Interest rates that had peaked in September 81, they bottomed out, say, around August 2020 at an artificially low level. This level of interest rates were achieved by money printing by central banks. Now, this is my view, we are in a rising cycle of inflation and a rising cycle of interest rates, which may last for 20, 30 years. So we take the low 1920, we may go up until 1940 or 45 or something like this. But these are long cycles. Now, as inflation accelerates, there are periods like in the 70s when inflation comes down for 2 years in a row. The rate of inflation drops from, say, 8% to 4%, and interest rates on the 30-year treasuries drop from, say, 9% to 4%. Can happen. Has happened in the 70s, and yet interest rates went to 18% in 1981.
So the question is, how can they keep interest rates this high with the debt burden?
It's not a problem. Print money.
Yeah.
Tell me, how can you go to Istanbul, you observe the city, you go to Argentina, you observe the streets, everything looks hunky-dory, and inflation is still around 60, 80, 100%. The level of interest rates does not tell you if money is tight or not.
Mm-hmm. But then if you do that, if you monetize the debt, doesn't that deter buyers from U.S. Treasuries and U.S. debt in the long run?
Yes. But some pension funds, they must buy bonds. Some sovereign funds, they must buy bonds. And as long as you pay, some people will buy bonds, and the interest rates one day will go to positive. But yes, I mean, you're right. But it takes time. The government can say the government can go to corporation and say, or they can go to Social Security and say, you must buy government bonds by law. What do you want to do?
Yeah, and no one's going to say no to that with men with guns. Are you in the market for gold and silver? Then if so, please consider Miles Franklin. They are my gold and silver dealer of choice. So not only do they have super competitive prices that you're going to have a really hard time finding elsewhere, but then they also have top-notch customer support. I know Andy Schechtman, the owner of Miles Franklin, top-notch guy. I wouldn't be recommending them to you if I didn't have faith in their product. But what you really want to do, however, you want to email them at info@milesfranklin.com, and you want to say that Capital Cosmos sent me in the description line, because when you do that, you can get access to their special pricing sheet. You want to get that special pricing sheet because you're going to get special prices that you won't find on the website itself. So email them at info@milesfranklin.com. Tell them that Capital Cosmos sent you, and you won't be heckled with spam emails, etc. There's no commitment necessary. I promise you that. And with that said, I will let you get back to the video. My friend Andy brought up this this Operation Sandbag. I don't know if you've heard of it. Andy Schechtman, that is. I don't know if you know who he is, but he brought up Operation Sandbag, which is essentially the idea that you could have a collection of like BRICS nations or adversarial nations to the West, where they all just collectively sell their treasuries at the exact same time. Is that something you see that could be possible?
It's possible, but it's not likely to happen. How does he explain how India and China would sell on the same day? One would cheat the other. That I guarantee you.
Right.
One would say that it would sell the day before. that I guarantee you. Or how would India and Pakistan agree? Or Israel and Iran agree? How would they all agree?
Yeah, it would have to be a massive conspiracy to pull something like that off, especially with...
Not going to happen, but I want to say this, that the dollar will eventually lose its status of the world's reserve currency. That is written in stone. What is not written in stone is whether it will happen tomorrow or in 5 years' time. But it is likely to happen, step by step, like an avalanche, slowly developing and then exploding. But in my view, the dollar is of course doomed as a currency. But the others are also doomed. That is the beauty. The dollar exists and is a strong currency as long as the others are equally bad or worse, which is the case. I live in Thailand. The Thai price level is much, much lower than the price level in the United States. That you don't need to be an economist to observe that. Now, if you came to me and asked, Mark, you live in a country where the price level is much lower than in the US, why wouldn't you put all your money in Thailand and not in the US? I'd be very reluctant to hold all my assets in Thailand. Equally, I would be very reluctant to hold all my assets in the US. So I diversify.
Risk management, yes.
Well, I don't know much about risk management, but about common sense, I know a little something.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about location. So there's wars going on in Eastern Europe, Middle East. Maybe soon it'll be in South China Sea and Korean Peninsula. And then you have the crisis with the currencies. How does one really decide on for a place to live? I've had commentators come on here and say, No, well, if you're in the United States, you may as well stay in the United States, go find somewhere rural and live there because the collapse is going to happen everywhere. And I have some people who tell me that, maybe it's better to go live in the southern hemisphere where you're away from any adversarial kinetic action or things of that nature. Do you want to move to a neutral country where it's not allied with either BRICS or the West? I know you live in Thailand, obviously, so you've already made your decision. Are you bullish bullish on Thailand in that respect? Or are there any other countries that should be on the radar screen for individuals who are thinking about this?
I mean, your question is a little bit, to which doctor should you go? I have no idea. It depends on your problem.
Right.
I mean, for me, Thailand may be attractive, but not for you or not for someone else. I mean, I don't know. People, they ask me, what do you think? Should I live in Thailand? I have no idea. I can say to them, for me, the country is suitable, but whether it's suitable for you, I don't know. And an individual who asked the question is actually, in my view, to some extent dumb, because this is a question that is very personal. He should go himself and see for himself and travel through Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, Hong Kong, Singapore, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, Bhutan, God knows what, and then decide himself. And the decision may be wrong because he may have the wrong impression the first day. But you can adapt. You can say, okay, I made a mistake. I have to adapt to the new conditions of life. But what you said is equally true. If I lived in Europe and I had my family in Europe and this and that, I would consider living in a small place in a rural area, not next to a bridge, because bridges in war times are the first ones to get destroyed, but near a river that is not flooding. This is another issue. You would have to live a little bit higher than the river level, because I live next to the river, and in 20 years we've been flooded already twice. But it's not the end of the world. It's repairable. It's not like an earthquake which destroyed everything, or fire in a city. But anyway, these are very personal things, and I can't answer it. I can only say this. In many so-called, like Thailand, they say it's a failed state and so forth. But I wrote about it, that why is it, or is it because it's a failed state that so many expatriates come and live in Thailand? From all over the world, they come here, and they like to be in Thailand for whatever reason. So it's maybe not such a failed state. Maybe the definition that are used in the Western world for failed state is wrong. Maybe.
Yeah, how so? How does the West define a failed state versus the reality?
For the Western world, is GDP growth is very important. In my view, is its importance is overstated in the Western world. What matters is the standard of living. And in Thailand, the standard of living of expatriates is relatively high, because the cost of living is much lower than in the Western world.
And so, when we look back at history, I mean, you pointed it out, like this isn't the first time it's happened, this reset. When it comes to the British sterling and other currencies, historically speaking, where are we at? And is there like a parallel that we can paint to where we're at currently in our world? And what does history tell us about these currency resets?
Well, there are resets that are advantageous, and there are resets that are not so advantageous. Let me give you two examples. Life in Russia before the Russian Revolution of 1918 wasn't particularly nice for lower class people. But there was some prosperity, and the farmers had their farms, and some became actually quite wealthy, not enormously wealthy, but some people had large farms and so forth. And then the Bolsheviks came and destroyed everything with the socialist ideology. And not only did they destroyed everything, under the Bolsheviks, the agricultural production of Russia shrunk by something like 70%. So to all the young people in America and everywhere in the world who want more, the government to do more and want socialism and so forth, to them I can say one thing. If you're prepared to accept a meaningfully lower standard of living for yourself and your families, then socialism may be appropriate for you. But I've been already in the 50s and 60s in many socialist countries. I can tell you it is distressing and it is depressing and it is a disaster for society. People have no freedom, no nothing. And the capitalistic system is not a system that has only advantages and no disadvantages. I'm aware capitalism is better at accumulating wealth and creating wealth than at distributing it. But it is certainly better at distributing wealth than socialist governments. That I assure you. Or any government, and especially as incompetent as we have nowadays in the US, in Canada, Australia, and Western Europe. But the second instance of a major reset was China became communist in 1949. And everything was nationalized, and people who had real estate, it didn't matter whether it was in the south or in rural areas or in urban centers. It was all taken away, like in Russia. Socialists are very good at stealing because the basic philosophy of a socialist is envy. Envy of people who are successful in life because they work. They're not geniuses, but they became wealthy through hard work. Like you go anywhere in the world, the Jews tend to be an upper income group of people because they worked harder wherever they went in the world. So anyway, 49, China becomes communist. Shanghai, who used to be called the Paris of the East and a very important financial center, vanished. I went for the first time to China in like 78, 76. Couldn't get a taxi, nothing worked. Everything, no lights, and people had blue dresses and blue and green dresses and so forth and so on. Then Deng Xiaoping opens up the country. It was an experiment. It was with the 7 economic zones in the south, mostly located around Hong Kong. It was successful. And by the late 1980s, the whole country became a special economic zone. And since then, we had rapid economic growth. And I can say to all the China bashers, it's hard to imagine a society that comes from extreme poverty, like they were living in the 70s, to a relatively high standard of living. You understand? The infrastructure in China is that of the most modern societies in the world, much better than what you find in New York City and Chicago and so forth. And that is a reset from a communist country to a market economy. It's not a 100% market economy, but to a large extent, it's a free economy, to a large extent.
Right. And is there any way out of the abyss here? I mean, it seems like, when, this is the irony of it, the West is going down this path because of the luxuries of its past. The luxuries of enabling capitalism through the years has made them so wealthy that they don't have to worry about all the necessities and all of these things on the lower part of the pyramid of needs anymore. And now they become so detached from reality. They think they can just, that they think that their shit doesn't stink. They can create anything. It's going to be gold. That's why they go towards this socialism, like you say.
Yes, I mean, this is a very good point that you're raising. And I urge your viewers to watch some videos of Milton Friedman, who already in the 80s and 90s made observations about, countries moving to the left. And in one brief video, he says, we, the West, won the Cold War. Our principles of freedom and a free economy and the capitalistic system proved to be superior to the command economy of the Soviet Union. And with this victory and the fall of the Berlin Wall, what did we do? We adopted more and more socialist policies. It's remarkable, And so my concern is that we are in a situation where too many people benefit from the government. They get subsidized from the government. Social benefits, companies get, if you build a factory, we'll give you $100 billion. The factory may not make sense economically, but the government, because they give them $100 billion, company will build the factory. So with all these measures, we are retarded economic growth and we have less freedom. And that is a concern to me. And in Thailand, that was the original question. We have less of these government interventions, much less. Also in Asia, less.
Yeah, I'd like to point out that if you look at the United States government spending to GDP ratio, it's about 15%. Venezuela is 20%. So we're not that far off from Venezuelan numbers. Now, if you look at the Chinese government spending to GDP ratio, it's sitting at around 30%. If you look at the European Union, it's 50%. So who's the real socialist here? Is it China or is it the EU? Do you consider China a socialist
I would
country?
be very
or no?
careful with the US and saying government spending is 15% of GDP because we have to add state governments. We have to add the spending by municipalities and so forth. And I've seen statistics now where the federal government spends actually more than, I think it was 27% of GDP. And all together, with all the subsidies, and it's an accounting issue. Does the government build, say, shoes, or does it subsidize a company that manufactures shoes? And so the statistics are not very reliable. But in general, I can say this. Throughout the 19th century in America, federal government spending was 3% of GDP maximum. By 1910, it had grown to about 8%. In European countries, between 7% and 12%. Now, everywhere, it's about close to 50%. That is a disaster for economic growth, I tell you. Now, someone will turn around and say to me, Mark, you're looking at economic growth as if that was important. I look at the quality of life. The government spent all this money on cleaner energy and things like this. There is some truth to it. I mean, I can see that in some countries, the quality of life has improved. But I can also see that in some countries, including Chicago, the quality of life has gone down meaningfully. San Francisco, meaningfully. Now, some rich families will say, what do we care about the homeless that live down there near Embarcadero? They live on the hill. Well, one day the homeless will move to the hill.
Yeah. I mean, the rich,
The
they see the
population of
ramifications
rats
that
and termites and so forth multiplies.
Yeah, they see the rich are the people who see it at the very last stage. The rot moves up from the bottom up, and then when it's too late, then like you said, the homeless people are living right outside your yard.
Yes.
So
When
it
it's too
seems,
late, then no longer live outside your yard. They live in your living room.
yeah, and then they're considered squatters, and you
I'd
can't
like
remove
to
them.
see Nancy Pelosi having some illegals in her house. That would be the day.
Yeah. So I mean, these people don't eat their
Anyway,
own
let's
cooking.
talk about investments because we're running out
Mark,
of
it's been a
time.
pleasure having you on. Where can people find you?
Well, I have a website. Some people keep a blog of mine, and then some people think that I'm writing the blog, but that's not true. I have two reports that I publish every month, the Gloom, Boom, and Doom report and the monthly report. They're both about the same. They have a website, gloomboomdoom.com. I repeat all in one word, gloomboomdoom.com.
Excellent. Well, we'll have the link to that.
Somewhere, they can find me in nightclubs in Chiang Mai.
Well, we'll have the link to the Boom, Gloom, and Doom report in the description box below. So be sure to check it out, guys. Mark, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate your time. And if you enjoyed this content, give us a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and check out our Substack, capitalcon.substack.com, and we'll catch you in the next episode. Bye, guys.
Thank you very much for your time. I own gold shares. I have to say, up to now, they've been acting very badly. Now, some people say, Mark, this stock has gone up and that stock has gone up. I'm just telling you, you look at the GDX, is a collection of mining companies. You look at the GDXJ, which is the junior mining index. You look at the mining index in Canada, in Australia, in the US. Nobody can dispute the fact that the gold share indices are way below the previous high, when gold is at the new high. Quite frankly, the financial community should wake up and try to be objective about things and not always kind of describe things in a beautiful way